Hi everyone, it's Steph here from the Novelty Corner. Welcome back to my channel and welcome back to the next installment of my Psy-Changeling review series. We are up to Caressed by Ice, which is book 3 in the Psy-Changeling series. This is possibly my favourite book in the entire series. It's the one I've definitely reread the most. It is Judd and Brenna's story and our first book set amongst the Snowdancer clan, and I'm really excited to talk about it. If you have not been following along with this series, I have a playlist where I have started corralling my now 3 videos talking about this series where I go into in-depth summaries. And in this video, now that we're starting to really unpack some of the bigger world things that are going on in this series, I'm going to break it up into slightly different sections. I'm going to do an in-depth summary of Brenna and Judd's story, plus a summary of what's happening in the Psy-Changeling World, and then I'm also going to talk about a few bits and pieces that don't really fit into those 2 categories, and I'll have timestamps for all of those down below. Before I do talk about this story, something I do want to mention at the start of this video is that 1, there will be spoilers, and 2, that in the very first book of the series, Brenna was actually kidnapped, tortured, and raped by a telekinetic Psy, so there are trigger warnings for all of that because she's still dealing with the fallout from it. And there is an element of PTSD woven into the story. And then beyond that, in the actual greater story, there is a series of murders and attacks that take place on people. So if those are things that are triggering to you, be aware of that going into this series because they can be reasonably violent. There doesn't tend to be a lot of on-the-page violence. It's more mentioned, and also the after effects of all of those things. So be aware of that going into the series. All right, so let's get started with Brenna and Judd's story. The very start of the book opens with sort of a prelude prologue that is all about the history of the Arrows, which is a group of Psy assassins who have very specialized psychic abilities, specifically geared towards killing people. We get a little bit of a backstory about that because what we know is that Judd was a former Arrow, so he has gone through all of this training from a very young age. As we know, the Psy prize silence because it helps them keep control and they remain impartial to a lot of things, and that's a huge part of Judd's character going into the story. So that's really the setup to provide sort of a backstory as to why Judd is kind of reluctant to talk about his past with people initially. As we begin the story, we go into Brenna's backstory and how she was the changeling who was kidnapped, and she's now currently still working through a lot of the fallout of her kidnapping, her torture, and her rape. Between book 1 and now, it's stated that she's been working with Sasha Duncan, who is the empath from the first book, and they've been working together to kind of heal some of her psychic breaks. We find out that Judd has been helping Sasha with that because he's able to lend her some of his power in order to maintain those sessions. We also are reminded that Judd was involved in her rescue and was one of the reasons why she was found, but Brenna doesn't know exactly how much involvement he had in her rescue at this point. Then we discover that a Snowdancer wolf, Timothy, has been murdered inside the den. This obviously casts doubt on people within the den that someone has murdered one of their own. And when Brenna sees the body, she realizes that she had seen this in a dream or nightmare, really. This becomes really quite concerning to her because she feels like she's losing it, that she's been irreparably damaged. It does prompt her to continue to work a little bit with Sasha, but also to contact Faith Nightstar, who is a Psy who's able to see the future. She was the main character in book 2, and the two begin sort of a tentative friendship as Faith tries to work out whether what Brenna's actually witnessing is a future vision or whether it's something else. We get aspects of Judd working outside of the Snowdancer group. He has connections still to the Psy community through the Ghost, who is an unknown character or an unknown figure in the Psy world at the moment, as well as Father Perez, who is sort of a go-between between Judd and the Ghost. And the 3 of them are working together towards destabilizing the Psy Council by basically hitting targets and Psy Council businesses. Up until this point, Judd has really had no place within the Snowdancer hierarchy, and so Hawk, who is the alpha of the Snowdancer clan, offers Judd a position as a soldier and really as a lieutenant in the pack, which would basically solidify his position in the pack, but also mitigates the effects of having another really strong alpha male in the pack without a place in the hierarchy, which is problematic. Judd accepts this, and then he also takes a job working one of the outer perimeter sections because what he's concerned about is that he doesn't play very well with other people. So Hawk assigns him to this outer perimeter, and there's a cabin, and he's basically removed from the pack. Most of the reason why he accepts is because he's trying to protect his family. So his brother Walker and his nieces and nephews, Sienna, Marley, and Toby, all escaped the Psynet, which we found out in book 1. He wants the kids to grow up in a safe environment, and they've already started to be accepted by the Changeling pack. So by doing this, he's able to still keep them safe within their newfound family group. Brenna discovers that Judd has left without saying anything to her, and we discover that she's sort of developed this connection to him through the help he's given Sasha and the way that he doesn't treat her like she's broken, which is something I'll come back to later. She has her family surrounding her. She has 2 older brothers, Drew and Riley, who love her and did everything they could to find her. And now that she's back, they sort of treat her like she's fragile and she's about to break. And it's really confining for her. And so when she discovers where Judd has gone, she takes off after him without telling her brothers, which frustrates them. While initially Judd tries to get her to return to the den, she reveals to him that since her kidnapping and her attack, she has not been able to shift into her wolf form. And so the two have a moment where they begin to talk to each other as equals. They discuss Timothy's murder, and because Brenna has revealed something quite personal to her, Judd in turn reveals that they suspect that Timothy had been on a changeling drug, Ruby Crush, and that Judd himself had taken Jax, which is a Psy drug that enhances mental abilities and was designed specifically for the arrows, and yet Judd had side effects that he didn't like, and so he managed to find a way to convince his handlers to take him off of the drug. We know that Jax has really terrible effects on changelings, and that somehow it started to get into the changeling population, and this does become more relevant later on as well. So it's sort of laying all of those seeds through the greater world building. They both admit their mutual attraction to each other, but Judd is still extremely wary and he has no intention of breaking silence. He's too worried about what his abilities would do to someone if he ever lost control, and he believes that having any kind of emotional connection is going to induce that loss of control. He's a bit of an asshole at this point, and he deliberately hurts her feelings so that she might end up leaving him alone, which of course doesn't work. And then the two are attacked at the cabin by hyena shifters, and this is where Judd actually reveals that he is a telekinetic Psy. Previously, Brenna had thought he was just telepathic, but he's actually a telepath and a telekinetic. And of course, this is quite triggering for her because she was attacked by a telekinetic, which is why he didn't tell her in the first place. We also discover that he is a teleport-capable telekinetic, and he's able to save Brenna by teleporting her out of harm's way. This does become important later on because there are telekinetics who are capable of teleporting, but there are also Psy whose specific abilities is to teleport. There's a bit of a distinction that comes into play a little bit later on. Having been pushed away by Judd, Brenna decides to try and go on another date with a packmate, and this goes very, very badly, and it ends up triggering a lot of things that happened to her, and she ends up attacking the guy that she goes out with and really revealing that she is not coping in a lot of ways to both her brothers, to Hawk, and Judd is the one who's able to talk her down from her sort of frenzied state. And he also helps her to tell her brothers that she actually needs space. She needs time to grieve, to grow, and to not feel like she's constantly being watched. So after the attack on Judd and Brenna, there is another attack on a changeling pack. This time it's made to look like it's the snow dancers, but they actually get there in time to stop the attack and take a prisoner. And so Judd and Indigo interrogate the hyena changeling and find out that the Psy have been programming weaker changelings or less dominant changeling packs into doing their bidding, which is a horrifying thought. And Judd ends up being involved in helping to deprogram the changelings who have been in the program. And what's even more horrifying is that they've done it to children. And the effects of this on him, knowing that children are actually innocent and should have no place in any kind of war, no matter who it's between, brings him closer to Brenna when they have a conversation around it, because he struggles to process the fact that some of these kids have been irreparably damaged. The next significant event in the book is that Brenna's brothers are attacked while outside the den, and they begin to realize this is the same person who had attacked Timothy. Drew is close to death, and this is where we get to see the actual specific designation of Judd's telekinetic abilities. He's a TK cell, which means he's able to manipulate things on a cellular level, and he has previously only really used this ability to kill people in his role as an arrow, but in this case, he tries to see if he can actually do the reverse and if he can heal on a cellular level. And so he essentially knits Drew's heart back together. In doing so, reveals the extent of his abilities to everyone. However, using his abilities in such a concentrated way because it takes a couple of hours, drains his abilities, and this is where we get a little bit of the history into flameouts for the Psy when they overextend their abilities. Essentially, they go into sort of a lockdown mode where they don't have access to their psychic abilities. They need a period where they can just sleep and their body recharges, and then depending on how much they overextended themselves, they have a period where their psychic abilities literally just cannot be used. And it's in this little window where his telekinetic and telepathic powers are dormant that Brenna and Judd have sex for the first time. The whole scene is actually really, really steamy because the one thing that you learn about Judd is he's very detail oriented, and he's researched this because he's essentially a virgin. He's never had sex. He spent a lot of time thinking and planning about if there was ever an opportunity, what would he do? And so it's kind of hot. And this becomes important again later on as more Psy male characters get involved in the series because Judd has a connection to a lot of them. And it's funny because he keeps passing his knowledge down to everyone else, which is a really funny little quirk. After this, they start looking into Drew's attack, and they begin to realize that there is a connection between the person who attacked Drew, Timothy's murderer, and Brenna's kidnapping, and that she's really at the center of it. And that eventually leads them to figuring out exactly who it is, because that person had to have easy access to both Timothy, Brenna, and Drew, and to know where everyone was going to be at any given point in time. I won't say who it is. I don't give those kind of spoilers away in these videos. And then of course the ending is really the decision around whether or not Judd is going to try and break his silence in order to maintain a relationship with Brenna. And he decides that he's not going to do it completely, because pretty much any time they've had sex, he's destroyed the room with his telekinetic powers, because they just go completely nuts, and anything that's not sort of bolted down ends up shattering or whatever. He does come up with a solution for it later on, and I can't remember which book it's in, but I'll make a note of it in future videos. However, he decides that he'll break some of his conditioning, so he sets about sort of unpicking some of the mental shields that have been put in place and leaving the ones that will actually help him manage his powers so that he doesn't accidentally hurt Brenna. And then as a result, it allows the mating bond between Brenna and Judd to snap into place. And that's sort of the end of their story. In terms of the series-wide story, particularly with the Psy Council, which we spend more time with in this book, we get our first point of view chapters from Caleb Krychek, who is the newest and the youngest Psy Council member. We also meet his aide, Silver Mercant, who becomes a protagonist in Silver Silence. This is laying a lot of the foundations for all of their future work within the series. We discover that the Psy Council knows about Brenna and about the effects that her torturer had on her psyche, and they're still deciding whether or not to keep her in play or whether to kill her because of what was done to her. We spend a little bit of time with Faith's father, Anthony, who is the one to reveal that there is something called Project One, which is a hive mind project spearheaded by some members of the council. Caleb and Nikita Duncan are both opposed to this, and they're trying to find out who exactly is behind this hive mind project, because the experiments in this area have started to go wrong and the participants are starting to die. Essentially, Protocol 1 is revealed to be an implant that is put into people's brains. There is sort of a command module implant, so one person literally controls the minds of others. This has not been a successful experiment, and we discovered that Henry and Shoshana Scott, the faux marriage of convenience in the council, are responsible for it. They had the implant in their heads, but they've had them removed now that they realized that they could die from them. So that's a lot of the Psy Council stuff. The final things that I wanted to talk about, this is sort of the miscellaneous section, really. I know through the summary of Brenna and Judd's story, I talked a little bit about Judd's abilities. So in the Psy-Changeling World, the highest level or the highest grade of Psy are the Cardinals, whose abilities are graded at level 10 or above. And generally speaking, most Cardinals only have one power that is significant and one that is much weaker. We know that Caleb Krychek is a Cardinal for 2 psychic abilities, which makes him one of the most powerful Psy alive. But what we discover is that Judd is a 9.9 telekinetic, so he's a hair's breadth away from being a Cardinal, but he's also a 9.4 telepath. Again, sort of this step away from dual Cardinal status, which I find really fascinating in this world, because in a lot of ways he has just as much power as Caleb. And I think it was a really interesting choice that Nalini Singh didn't actually push him into that, because previously the 2 Psy protagonists in the previous books have been Cardinals, and yet this time we get someone who is incredibly strong but doesn't have that same status. We do know that in his family group, Sienna and Toby are both Cardinals. That's his niece and his nephew. And I think his sister, their mother, was a Cardinal as well before she committed suicide. But essentially the point behind it was that it is incredibly rare for someone to have 2 really high level abilities. I really loved how Brenna in this book starts to rebuild her life. At some point during the story, she realizes that she needs to prove to everyone that she is okay and she can move forward. And so she starts to go back and look at what she was doing before she was kidnapped. And that was, she was completing her degree to become a really high level tech operative. She calls up some old colleagues because she wants to go back to her course and to complete it. And she finds out that she's actually already passed everything that she needs. And so she is extremely qualified and she's highly competent, and they use her as such, and she is able to contribute in a way that is representative of her skill level. And it happens in the book. I know I didn't mention it in the summary, but that's sort of part of the mystery plot storyline. But she's also able to get a job, and she has her pick of jobs, so she's not a damsel in any way. And that's probably why I really like Judd and Brenna's relationship, because we start off this book, you have someone who is extremely cold and really removed from making connections with other people, and she's someone who has been through something extremely traumatic, and she is at her weakest moment, and yet he never, of all the men in her life, he's the one who never treats her as though she's broken. He tries to protect her, but he never treats her like that damsel in distress. He wants her to be safe, obviously, but he recognizes that she's not going to be able to move forward if she's put in a cage, which is why I can accept when he's a bit of an asshole and makes decisions on her behalf, because there are other times when he truly lets her step up and lets her handle things the way that she needs them to be handled. I had two favorite scenes in the series, and they actually have nothing to do with Judd and Brenna collectively. They're not in the scenes together. My absolute favorite scene is when Judd is sort of walking through the snow dancer den, and he is accosted by 4-year-old Ben, who is a wolf changeling. And Ben is stark naked and he's running around the halls because he's escaped bath time. Lara, who is the pack healer, comes looking for him, and Ben uses Judd to hide. He literally hides behind him. Judd plays along with the little boy's escape attempt. It's a really sweet moment because we know that Judd is an uncle. We know that he loves his nieces and nephew, but he doesn't display that in the normal way, and yet he almost plays with Ben in this scene. Ben climbs all over him and shifts in his arms, which is a sign of trust. It's a moment for him realizing that he is part of this pack, and it is actually utterly adorable. I just love that scene. And then Brenna has a similar scene that I really love, which is with Marley, Judd's niece and Walker's daughter. And Brenna stumbles across her playing in the hallway, and Marley's using telekinesis to throw a ball around. And we know that Brenna is really uncomfortable around telekinetics. Marley asks Brenna why she doesn't like her, because she gets that feeling from the woman. And it's a really beautiful scene because Brenna suddenly sort of realizes that she's judged an entire group of people with disability based on the actions of one person, and that this very small child actually has never done anything to her, and yet this child feels like she has done something wrong because Brenna won't even acknowledge her, because especially in the Snow Dancer pack, everyone is family, and so everyone works together to raise all of the kids, no matter whether they're Psy or Changeling or anything like that. So it was a really sort of prominent scene. And I like that they both had their own scenes like that, because it forces them to think about their own situations in relation to other people. And I think the kids are a really clever way to do that, because all of the children in all of the packs are innocents. They have nothing to do with the overall issues going on in the adults' worlds. All they want is sort of this unconditional love, and they were just gorgeous scenes. All right, that's enough rambling. Who knows how long this video is going to be, because I talk a lot. I love this book, I really do. In the comments below, let me know if you have read this book. Do you have any favorite scenes? What did you like about it? If you didn't like it, that's fine too. Feel free to share those down below. I know that not everyone likes alpha characters. Judd is obviously one of my favorite characters in the whole series, so much so that I actually track his progress through the series. I don't really track anyone else's, but I do track his. Go figure. I believe the next book, if memory serves, is Mine to Possess, so I will hopefully get to that sometime soon, maybe in December, so stay tuned. I hope that wherever you are in the world, you are staying safe and healthy, and I'll see you all in my next video. Thanks so much for watching. Bye everyone.